And of course, we want to reduce turnover because of the cost that Mary just was talking about, but it goes way beyond that, right? It's really about the impact it has on the business, on the execution, and on the financial performance. And it all starts with that GM. We've been talking about this for many years, and we continue to believe it all starts with that GM retention. And I'm sure a lot of you would agree. And what we did here is take a look at the company's, or actually restaurant locations, and put them in three different buckets based on their GM turnover. Those that didn't lose any GMs, those that lost between 0 and 100%, so essentially lost a GM over the last 12 months, and those that lost more than one. And you see that the turnover for the rest of the management ranks within that restaurant goes up as you lose more GMs, right? Makes sense. If you don't have a stable leadership in your restaurant, chances are you're going to leave. It's not the best environment. You don't feel encouraged to continue to operate there. And then, of course, as based on the numbers that we saw before from Mary, there's that impact from a cost perspective, right? And we're thinking, those that are losing more than one GM a year, we're looking at almost $50,000 cost of restaurant turnover, or management turnover, not even including the hourlies. That's a 41,000 difference on average than those that didn't lose any GMs during the year. So obviously a huge financial impact from that perspective, but that's just one side of the coin. The really important part of it is what happens with performance. And what we see here is that those that were better at GM turnover, that retained a bigger percentage of their GMs, saw better results in the marketplace, 2.6% better comp traffic than their peers, and their hourly turnover is dramatically lower, or almost 17 points in the case of full service. And when you look at limited service, almost 1% more traffic growth, and then over 21% decrease in hourly turnover. So some really dramatic results. Now, you'll see this throughout this presentation. The gaps in traffic are smaller in limited service. Part of that is that been performing better. So overall, maybe already kind of in a higher standard, and probably because that's some tighter distributions. But overall, you can see that it does impact performance both in full service and limited service. We've seen that it starts with GM, it turns to better retention for the rest of the management ranks, and all that essentially means you get better retention for hourly employees as well, as we saw on the previous slide. So what does that mean if you do achieve that better retention for hourly employees? So what we did in this analysis, take a look at all the restaurants and classify those that have the worst turnover rates for their hourlies, and compare it to those that have the best turnover rates. So the top quartile versus bottom quartile. And this is what we saw from a traffic perspective. And this is the gap in performance against their peers by segment. So we're accounting for differences in segments in this as well. Back of house is 5%, front of house is 7% better in terms of traffic. And those that had the best retention and limited service had 1.3% better traffic growth over the period. So definitely some big differences in performance. Now, the reason this is happening really is through providing a better guest experience. And when we've done this analysis, whenever we tie that guest sentiment data back into here, we see that those with the better retention tend to have better and stronger net sentiment scores, particularly in some areas around food sentiment and service sentiment. Things like speed is perceived as much better in those that have better retention. For example, attentiveness, better retention also helps significantly. So it's all about driving that higher execution.